Привет, Odessa. Greetings from Odessa, Mama, on the shores of Black Sea. In fact, the Black Sea is just up behind me a few hundred meters. I am here in Arcadia, in the center of Odessa's seaside strip. And behind me, you can see a building. I think it's going to be a hotel, in fact, looking at it. So it's under construction, and someone is going to want to invest in real estate project like this one, in addition to the plethora of apartment buildings that are going up just over on this side over here. And some of those investors are going to be foreigners, not just Ukrainians are going to invest in it. And I've noticed an uptick in the number of messages from my former Insider Experience clients who came a few years ago. Many of these guys now have Ukrainian wives or fiancés, and just guys who've been consulting clients as well about Ukrainian real estate, whether right now is a good time to buy or not. So in this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of whether I feel it's a good time or not. It's obviously, I'm filming this during the Russo-Ukrainian war, and there is a lot of uncertainty. So you obviously need to do a lot of your own research and consider a lot of the geopolitical factors that might influence what's going on. If you're new to the channel, my name is Connor Klein. I actually have a background in international relations and specialization in this region. And I've been helping my clients with relocation, not just to Ukraine, but other countries in the region for the last few years. And I have a background as a lawyer. I actually worked for many years as a lawyer in Western Europe. So I'm your man, your Irish boy here on the ground in Ukraine. So let's get into today's video, where I'm going to explain to you whether right now is a good time to invest in real estate here in Ukraine. You might think that's a little bit mad, but yes, there are people who are willing to invest from abroad, and answer a couple of common questions I've been getting from my consulting clients on this topic. So let's get into the video. Adimo. So for the purposes of this quick primer video, I'm going to just answer a few of the common questions I received from consulting clients who are here in Ukraine, are planning to come to Ukraine, and are looking at residency and real estate. Normally, these are guys who have a Ukrainian wife or fiancé, so that's also relevant to the kind of questions they've been asking me. First thing, is this a good time to buy with respect to the situation in the Russo-Ukrainian war? Obviously, if you're interested in this video, you are aware that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014.
America is officially calling a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian troops spreading out throughout the strategic Crimean Peninsula. President Obama speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin, apparently pulling no punches, although it is unclear what the White House can really do about all of this.
And then a more extended invasion took place starting in late February 2022. We're into the third year of this extended invasion. Here in cities like Odessa, where I am today, Kyiv, Lviv are far away from the front lines. However, other cities like Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Dnipro, Zaporizhia are a lot closer and under more rocket attack than, say, here where I'm in Odessa. Perhaps also the air defense is a bit better because cities like Odessa, which has a big port, which is important for Ukraine's exports, also the capital Kyiv, which is the center of gravity for the country, and then Lviv, which is an important city in the west, they tend to have probably been prioritized in terms of air defense. It's obviously a factor you need to consider when considering buying real estate. Looking at things right now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like the fighting and the Russian rocket attacks in particular are going to stop anytime soon. Just in the last few days, since before I've been making this video, Russia has been targeting the critical infrastructure here in Ukraine. So that means power plants in particular, as well as some attacks on more civilian infrastructure, just civilians in general does happen. So you need to be cognizant of that, in particular, if you're planning to come in person to Ukraine. So looking forward to, say, the next 6 months to 2 years. It's very hard to predict beyond 2 years at this point. It would seem that unless there is a black swan event a black swan event either here in Ukraine, which would mean a Ukrainian collapse, which, well, for buying Ukrainian real estate would be pretty bad if you're a foreigner, in particular if you're from a country that is allied with Ukraine. Or there is a black swan event in Russia that leads them to conclude that this imperialistic venture against Ukraine has not been a good idea and they need to withdraw. Barring either of those kind of extreme situations, which are obviously slightly foreseeable, but in reality it's called black swan for a reason, is that, yeah, it kind of just happens, and then in retrospect everybody tries to say, well, it was obviously going to happen all the time. Probably we were looking at, this war continuing for at least another year, maybe 2 years, maybe even longer than that. So it makes it very hard to say whether this is the best time to invest in Ukrainian real estate, just because of the unpredictability of what's going to happen. Yeah, you have to plan out the different scenarios, like this continues as a long war, results in a stalemate. What does that mean versus, a Ukrainian full victory? What does that mean for real estate prices in the country? And of course, then also plan for the contingency of Russia winning, even though I think that's a very low probability event, and what that would mean for your investment here. So if we look at house prices or just apartment prices in the big cities where you're probably likely to invest, or maybe in a more residential area, maybe even out in almost a rural area, just across the board. Obviously this is a primer video. If you want more detailed research done, then you can consider investing in a consulting call. I have it down below in the video description. Just go down there and you'll see my consulting. But by and large, in the last year, we haven't seen huge changes in the prices. You see a little bit of an increase in cities that are further away from the front line, so cities like Lviv in the west of Ukraine, and also in Uzhhorod, which is right on the border with Slovakia. For example, we've seen prices increase a bit there, and also they've gone down in cities that are closer front line. For example, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia. These cities are facing more rocket attacks than cities further in the west, and obviously the risk of those cities being occupied by Russia is quite different in terms of risk profile. If you're looking at, say, Zaporizhia versus Uzhhorod, well, obviously the Russians would have to get through Zaporizhia first to get all the way to Uzhhorod, and a lot of Ukrainians have moved further west as a result. So prices have gone up, we'll say, between 10 and 20% in some cities, and gone down commensurately in other cities. But overall, it hasn't been a big difference whether it's the newly built or secondary market. Just across the board, as a generalization, it has been pretty stable in the last year. Obviously, a lot of Ukrainians left in 2022, but a lot of them have returned to Ukraine as a situation, and the front lines have stabilized. There haven't been massive movements in the front lines since, say, October 2022, when Ukraine liberated the city of Kherson. That is located on the Dnieper River. Basically, that is kind of a new front line, that river, to a certain extent, until you get to near Zaporizhia. So one question that I was asked by a client is, what is likely to happen if you were to buy real estate in a city that fell under Russian occupation? Well, looking at the precedents, it is not good for your real estate investment if that is the case. If you look at Crimea, which was the first part of Ukrainian territory that was seized and annexed by Russia back in 2014, whilst there weren't any immediate changes, and in theory foreigners can own property in Russia, obviously Crimea is under occupation, not internationally recognized as being part of Russia. It's recognized internationally as being part of Ukraine. But the Russians, in the beginning, they didn't seize people's property, but after a number of years, I think it was around maybe 6 or 7 years, they decided that if you have property in what they call a border area, then you need to be a Russian citizen. So basically, foreigners owned property in Crimea had to either sell the property to a Russian citizen, or the state came and took it off them and gave them some sort of compensation for taking their property. Now, if you look at what might be defined as border areas, I mean, it's likely to be everywhere that they seize in Ukraine. That is also starting to happen slowly in the newly occupied areas, we'll say in Zaporizhia, Kherson, and the previously occupied areas, basically in the Donbass, is that the same kind of scenario is broadly starting to happen. So basically, if you were to buy a property and then it was to be occupied by Russia, assuming that it wasn't destroyed in the process, obviously in cities like Mariupol, much of the city was razed to the ground. The city was effectively sacked. You see that in other smaller towns that Russia seized, like Bakhmut or Avdiivka. There isn't much left afterwards. Assuming you're somewhere that they seized and there's actually buildings standing, including your one, then very likely that unless you naturalize as a Russian citizen, which would come with a lot of other issues like potentially being conscripted into the Russian military, because you have to remember that Russia has conscripted men of military age, and you could say even higher than normal military age. I think it was up to 65 years of age in parts of occupied Ukraine. It happened in the Donbass. Actually started happening over a week before the extended invasion in 2022. And it's starting to happen now in other newly occupied areas. So you probably don't want to naturalize. I mean, it's your choice, but yeah, that would be the risk you would take there. So basically buying somewhere that, if you felt there was a risk of it being occupied by Russia, probably not a good investment. That said, of course, the chances of Russia making dramatic progress, looking at things right now, is pretty low, even with the lack of weapons that Ukraine had for 9 months as aid was delayed from the US. We have an alert siren there. Russia didn't make a huge amount of progress in the grand scheme of things, just some tactical local advances. So yeah, that was a question that came up. No, that's probably not good for your investment if it were to fall under Russian occupation. Another question was, what are the impacts of which name that the property is held in? As I said, guys who are coming here, my consulting clients in general, have a Ukrainian wife or fiancé. So should you have the property in your own name, in your wife or fiancé's name, or in a holding company? Now, according to Ukrainian law, assets that are acquired during the course of a marriage are marital assets, and in principle, they would be divided 50-50 if there was a divorce. And that is unless you have by contract a different division of property accounted for, or envisaged. So for example, in the West, we talk a lot about prenups. That isn't really the concept in Ukraine. It's kind of just a contract, so it can be before the marriage or after the marriage, and that would, if it's notarized, correct legal procedure is taken, then that would be a different division of property outside of a 50-50 split of marital asset. If it is before the marriage, then that would not be a marital asset. So I guess if you put, the long, the short of it is that if you put the property in your fiancé's name, then that is not a marital asset. So unless you then were to provide that it would be divided 50-50, or it would be divided in, some way that your fiancé doesn't get to keep all of the property, which would have to be provided by contract, then that would be the way that would happen if you were to split in the future. Of course, if it's your wife, then in principle, unless you do something else by contract, then it's going to be a 50-50 division. If you put it into holding company, there aren't so many benefits to doing that. Potentially for American citizens, there's some tax benefits depending on your tax situation, but that's quite a limited class. So now, in terms of using a holding company to obtain permanent residency for yourself, then you could invest into your holding company more than 100K and then have the company buy the property. But if you are a guy, who's either married to a Ukrainian or is engaged and planning to get married pretty soon, then actually by marriage would be another way to get permanent residency. Even easier or even better would be, or more stable way to get it is actually if you have a Ukrainian child. So I have friends who've used all of those methods to get permanent residency, either whether they were married or they were unmarried and had a Ukrainian child, and that also entitles them to Ukrainian permanent residency. At the moment, Ukraine doesn't in general allow dual nationality. So although there are certain classes that is allowed for, but it probably doesn't apply to you as a foreigner who's coming to Ukraine unless you were serving in the Ukrainian armed forces. So that is another way. So you could maybe decide to use the holding company to get permanent residency. But as I said, yeah, if you're already getting married or are married to a Ukrainian, then that would be superfluous. So yeah, if you have some basic questions about Ukrainian real estate, maybe drop them down below in the comment section here. Or, as I said, if you want some more bespoke advice and research, then consider investing in a consulting call. The long, the short of it is this is a pretty unpredictable situation in terms of not just the real estate market, but also clearly the geopolitical factors affecting the price of real estate here in Ukraine. So it is more of a speculative gamble whether this is the right time to invest in Ukrainian real estate or not. But in general, what I'm seeing with consulting clients and guys who are interested or write to me because they're interested in real estate, they have personal reasons to consider buying property right now in Ukraine. And that is the fact that they would, in principle, use it with their Ukrainian wife or fiancé. So then for those type of guys, it definitely may make sense to buy the property now because obviously they would get to use it in the meantime, rather than waiting for the Russo-Ukrainian war to play out, and hopefully that is in Ukraine's favor. So, razem do перемоги.
SAR Experience.
So behind me we have the Odessa Opera House, a stunning piece of architecture here in the heart of Odessa Mama. Now this is not up for sale. It's not the kind of real estate that you can obviously buy that easily. But if you are interested in just relocation to this region, what I'm calling New Europe, I'll link a video up on a card and down below in the video description if you want to know more about why I call this broader region New Europe. But basically it's the region in Europe between Germany and Russia. And in particular, if you're looking for advice about real estate, down below in the description to this video is a link to my consulting options, and we can jump on a call together and discuss what is the best strategy for you in terms of investing in real estate here in Ukraine at the moment. Or maybe you have other questions and other goals about relocating to this region. It might not necessarily be Ukraine, but it could also be other countries where I'm bringing my clients for the in-person experience, like Warsaw in Poland, Chisinau in Moldova, Riga in Latvia, also the other parts of 3 Baltic states like Vilnius or Kaunas in Lithuania, or up in Tallinn in Estonia. Or maybe you want to go all the way far, far, far east of here to the Central Asian steppes and Kazakhstan, Almaty, and the capital Astana. So down below, as I said in the video description, is a link to my consulting and also application form for the in-person experience, which is a premium introduction to these cities. And if you're new to this channel, maybe go and check out a few playlists I put together. I'm gonna link them up on cards, also down below in the video description as well. First one is, let's start with the vodka series, the Vodka series. It's over 50 hours of content where I dive deep into the mindset in this region. Second one is to go and look at a series of city blogs. Usually those are the ones where I am currently having my in-person experience, or in the past where I was bringing my clients to. And then finally we have the guys who are single, which is not all of my viewers nowadays, especially the guys come to Ukraine. As I said, a lot of them, they actually have significant others here in Ukraine. But for the single guys in particular, I have like a set of tutorials for the dating scene here, for dating the uber beautiful women of this region. So, you know, mess it up, because this is the region, in my opinion, that on average has the most beautiful and maybe even the best girls in terms of morals. At times, not all of them. There are ones that you want to avoid, so definitely go and check out that third playlist that I have. It's like a series of tutorials. And a pleasant evening from Odessa Mama here in Ukraine. Do побачення. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
SAR Experience.